Have you ever woken up one day and realized they were just gone? No explanation, no argument, no farewell, just silence. Cold, cruel silence. It's like a door slammed shut behind your back and all you could do was stand there, frozen, confused, betrayed. You scroll through old texts searching for signs. You replay the conversations in your head wondering, did I miss something? Was it me? Why didn't they say goodbye? But here's the truth most people won't tell you. Some people don't walk away because you failed them. They vanish because you saw too much. You got too close. And rather than confront their own reflection in your eyes, they escape. In Stoic philosophy, we learn not to chase what flees, but to stand still in the eye of the storm. Because sometimes, the greatest response to abandonment is your silence, your growth, your decision to disappear, not to punish them, but to protect your peace. This video is for the ones who were left behind, but didn't stay broken, for the quiet souls who chose not to explain themselves, but to rebuild in silence and let time do the talking. You don't need revenge. You don't need closure from someone who ran. Just vanish with dignity and watch what happens next. There's a particular kind of silence that cuts deeper than any scream. It's not the silence of peace or solitude. It's the silence that follows a sudden absence, the disappearance of someone you once trusted. No fight, no warning, just gone. At first, you don't panic. You think maybe they're just busy. You tell yourself, they'll call tomorrow. You check your phone more than usual. You replay the last conversation, hunting for clues, wondering what you might have said or done wrong. Days pass, then weeks, and the silence becomes louder than words ever could. You feel abandoned, not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but in a quiet, suffocating one. It's like walking into an empty room that used to be full of warmth, and now the air feels colder, heavier. You start questioning your worth. Was I that easy to leave behind? Maybe it was a friend you thought would be there forever. Maybe it was a sibling who stopped returning your calls after a disagreement. Or maybe it was someone you loved deeply, someone who said they'd never walk away until they did. What makes this kind of abandonment so painful isn't just the absence, it's the lack of closure. No explanation, no goodbye. Just an emotional void where certainty used to live. That's what leaves you haunted, not knowing what went wrong, not knowing if they ever cared, not knowing if it was real. And the world doesn't help much either. Some people will tell you, just move on. Others will suggest you reach out again, as if your dignity hasn't already been crushed by the silence. Deep down, you wish they would just acknowledge the pain instead of minimizing it. This kind of vanishing act makes you feel powerless, like someone held your heart, then slipped it into their pocket and walked away as if it meant nothing. And that helplessness morphs into shame. You ask yourself, why do I miss someone who didn't even have the decency to say goodbye? It makes you angry. But even your anger feels like a betrayal to yourself, because you're still giving them space in your mind, even when they gave you nothing in return. And here's the bitter truth. Sometimes the people who vanish without a word do it because they don't want to face the damage they caused. They don't have the courage to deal with the consequences of their behavior. It's easier to ghost than to grow, easier to disappear than to be held accountable. But what if the silence is their prison, not yours? What if vanishing is not power, but a symptom of cowardice? That's the question Stoic philosophy helps us ask. The Stoics didn't chase people who walked away. They didn't beg for explanations. Instead, they focused inward. They turned their pain into power, not by pretending it didn't hurt, but by learning to hold that hurt with dignity, not desperation. So the problem isn't just that someone left you without a word. The real problem is that most of us don't know how to respond when that happens. We spiral. We chase closure from people who have no intention of giving it. We let their silence define our worth. But what if we did the opposite? What if their silence became the spark, not of sadness, but of self-respect? This video is for the ones who were left behind and are finally ready to stop waiting at a door that will never open again. It's time to vanish, not out of revenge, but out of respect for yourself. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. When silence speaks louder than words, some betrayals scream, others whisper, and then there are those that say nothing at all, yet leave a louder echo than any shouted insult ever could. In the realm of sibling betrayal, silence can be the cruelest language. It's not just the absence of words. It's the absence of acknowledgement, of love, of shared history. It's your brother ignoring your calls on the day of your mother's funeral. It's your sister walking past you at a family gathering as if you're invisible. It's the message that somehow you're no longer part of the tribe. This part of the story isn't about dramatic confrontations or cruel words flung in anger. No, it's about the subtler, more insidious fractures, the ones that happen in the quiet moments. These betrayals take root in omission, not commission, and they linger in the silence, growing larger with every unspoken word. In this chapter, we'll explore 5 such betrayals. Each one might seem small on its own, but together they tell a story of abandonment, a story that Stoic philosophy teaches us to confront not with vengeance, but with clarity and strength. These aren't just hypothetical tales. These are emotional realities that many carry in their hearts, but rarely dare to name aloud. You'll find that you're not alone, and maybe, just maybe, you'll also find a path through the pain. Let's begin. Part 1. When they choose, vanishing over truth. It always starts with something small, a delayed response, a canceled plan, a change in tone that no one mentions, but you feel it, a strange coldness wrapped in politeness. You tell yourself it's nothing. You make excuses for them. They're probably just busy. They're going through something. They'll reach out when they're ready. But the silence grows louder. Suddenly, the person who once laughed with you, shared meals with you, maybe even said, "I love you," is no longer there. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, and worst of all, deliberately. They vanish, without a word, without closure, as if everything you built together was disposable, as if you were disposable. This isn't about ghosting and dating apps. This is about family, old friends, a sibling, a partner you built a life with, someone you thought had the maturity, the courage, and the emotional backbone to say what they feel, no matter how hard, but instead, they disappeared. Why do people choose to vanish rather than face the truth? Because silence is easier than confrontation. Because disappearance absolves them of responsibility. Because they lack the emotional tools to sit in discomfort and say, "This isn't working and here's why." But for you, the one left behind, the silence doesn't feel like peace. It feels like betrayal in its most cowardly form. And that's the heart of this pain. When someone disappears, they leave you in a fog of unanswered questions. Your mind races, spiraling down into theories. Did I say something wrong? Was I too much? Did they ever care at all? And each question chips away at your self-worth. The Stoics warned about this inner spiral. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change, for I seek the truth by which no one was ever truly harmed." But what if the truth is never offered to you? What if all you get is silence? Then your task becomes harder. You must build your own closure. You must heal with no apology, no explanation, just your own inner reasoning. That's the battle. You see, silence is a form of emotional violence when it's used to avoid responsibility. It keeps the person in control while robbing you of clarity. It shifts the burden onto you, making you question everything while they quietly move on, untouched by the debris they left behind. But here's a deeper truth. Their silence says more about them than it ever did about you. It reveals their fear, not your failure, their emotional immaturity, not your inadequacy. Some people are terrified of emotional honesty. They fear hurting you, but not enough to act with courage. They fear being the bad guy, so they do nothing and become exactly that. Others don't want to explain because the truth they carry is too selfish, too ugly, or too weak to speak aloud. They'd rather vanish than admit, "I didn't value this as much as you did." And while you're in pain, they may pretend nothing happened. But make no mistake, avoidance has its cost. The silence they chose may protect them from discomfort today, but it often haunts them later in forms they can't recognize. Guilt, isolation, and the erosion of true connection. So what do? You don't chase. You don't beg. You don't drown yourself in guesses. Instead, you go inward, stoically. You return to what you know about your own integrity. You recall every moment you showed up with honesty, every time you gave with sincerity. You realize their silence is not a verdict on your worth, but a mirror reflecting their inability to face hard conversations. And maybe in time, you even feel grateful. Grateful that they showed you who they truly are. Grateful that they removed themselves from your life before the cost became higher. Grateful that you've been invited, however painfully, into a new stage of growth. Because in the absence of their words, you find your own voice. And it says, "I deserved honesty. I deserved a goodbye, and I'll never let someone's silence define my story again." Part 2, the silent collapse. What happens after they leave quietly? It starts with silence, not the peaceful kind that brings calm or clarity. No, this is a silence that echoes through your bones. One day, they're in your life. The next day, they're not. No farewell, no explanation. Just the digital equivalent of a slammed door. You scroll through your messages, half hoping to find something you missed. A sign, a reason. You play back memories like surveillance footage, scanning for where things went wrong. But there's nothing obvious. Just the quiet unraveling of something you thought was solid. And now the silence begins to take its toll, not just on your heart, but on your mind. Because when someone leaves without a word, they don't just exit your life. They leave you haunted by why. They leave the room, but stay in your head. The hardest part isn't that they left. It's that they didn't give you a chance to prepare. There was no final conversation, no closure, just a vanishing act that rewrote the script of your relationship in an instant. What was once laughter becomes questioning. What was once trust becomes suspicion. They leave quietly, but the noise they leave behind is deafening. You start replaying your last conversations, that dinner where they seemed distracted, that phone call where their responses were just a little too short, that moment when they smiled but their eyes didn't. Were those signs? Were you blind? This overthinking becomes a ritual, and slowly you begin to doubt your worth. If someone could discard you without a word, maybe you never meant anything. Maybe you were just a temporary convenience, but that's a lie. And deep down, you know it. Yet it doesn't stop the sting. The ego wounds that silence leaves behind. There's a betrayal that happens when someone ghost leaves. It's not just emotional. It's existential, because now you're forced to reckon with yourself through their absence. You ask questions you shouldn't have to. Was I too much? Not enough? Did I ask for something unreasonable? Was I blind to their unhappiness? This isn't curiosity, it's self-interrogation, and it's brutal. Silence becomes a weapon they wield from afar. Without saying a word, they've taken control of the narrative. And now you're left trying to fill in the blanks with your own insecurities. Their absence becomes your punishment. And for many people, especially those of us later in life, this kind of abandonment doesn't just reopen old wounds. It confirms them. It triggers the same shame we felt as children, being left out, rejected, or misunderstood. Except now it's dressed in adult clothes. Life continues, but you carry a ghost. You start functioning again. You go to work. You tend your garden. You make small talk at the store. But they're still there, like a splinter under your skin. Every time your phone lights up, your heart jumps for half a second. You check your email more often. You wonder if they'll come to their senses, if they'll apologize, if they'll explain. But most of the time, they don't. And when they don't, the silence becomes permanent. This doesn't mean you don't heal. Eventually, you do, but not in a way that forgets them. You simply learn to carry their absence with more grace. You learn to smile around the wound. You begin to live again, not because they came back, but because you came back to yourself. That's the real Stoic lesson here. You can't control who stays or goes, but you can control the meaning you make from it. How their collapse begins, quietly, invisibly, inevitably. Here's the secret most people miss. Those who disappear without explanation don't actually get away with it. They often collapse, not publicly, not dramatically, but silently in the same way they left. Why? Because people who walk away without accountability carry guilt. They might suppress it, distract themselves, justify their actions. But over time, the truth always finds its way back. It shows up in restless sleep, in shallow relationships, in their inability to feel deeply again. When someone disappears without closure, it reveals more about them than about you. It shows emotional cowardice. It shows fear of confrontation. It shows an inability to honor the value of what they had. And while they may look fine on the outside, smiling on social media, taking vacations, moving on, they're often haunted by the parts of themselves they left behind when they walked out. Because here's what Stoicism teaches us. People who avoid pain also avoid growth. And when you run from accountability, you only delay your suffering. Their collapse doesn't always look like failure. It looks like emotional emptiness, like never finding real connection again, like avoiding vulnerability, like numbing instead of living. That's the slow, quiet collapse. Your healing is their mirror. There's a powerful shift that happens when you start to reclaim your life, when you stop waiting for their return, when you start finding joy again, not in spite of the silence, but through it. That's when the balance of power changes, because now your healing becomes their reckoning. They may never say it, they may never reach out, but at some point they'll notice you've stopped needing them, that you've grown, that you've risen above what they left you in, and that, more than any message, confrontation, or revenge, is the most powerful collapse of all. Not theirs, yours. You collapsed into someone stronger. Part 3. When you let go, they start to feel it. At first, letting go feels like surrender, like giving up something you once held onto with both hands, trembling with hope. You stand in the ruins of what once was, a relationship, a bond, a trust, and everything inside you wants to fix it, to rewind the clock, to hear one honest explanation, to get back the version of them that cared. But sometimes, silence is the only truth you're given, and so you let go, not with rage, not with revenge, but with something far more terrifying to them, indifference. And that's when everything starts to shift. You see, when you finally stop reaching out, when you no longer chase closure or understanding, when their name stops echoing in your mind like a haunting melody, that's when they feel it. Not always instantly, but deeply, because silence speaks. Your absence becomes a presence in their life they cannot ignore. They expected anger. They were prepared for drama. They had excuses lined up if you had begged, texted, shown up at their door. But nothing, no reaction, no plea for explanation, that unnerves them, because in their mind, they were the center of your universe. They assumed you would orbit forever, They never imagined you'd find your way out of the gravitational pull of their manipulation. But you did. And that liberation, that letting go, that is your quiet power. It's the moment the control begins to shift. I remember a woman named Joanne. She was in her late 50s when she came to one of our Stoic circles. Her eyes held years of disappointment, mostly from her younger sister, who had ghosted her after borrowing thousands of dollars for a divorce. No thank you, no check-in, no repayment, just silence. Joanne spent months checking her phone, rehearsing words in her head, waiting for the moment her sister would come to her senses. But the moment never came. One day she brought a single sentence into the group. "I'm done holding space for someone who refuses to show up." She didn't say it with bitterness. She said it like someone who had finally put down a heavy bag she had been carrying up a steep mountain for years. A few months later, her sister sent her a message. It didn't say thank you. It didn't say I'm sorry. It said, "Hey, I've been thinking about you. Do you hate me?" They always feel it. They feel the shift. They feel when your energy is no longer theirs to feed on, because people can survive without your love. But what unsettles them is your peace. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending it didn't hurt. It means you no longer allow it to have power over you. And that is the most terrifying thing to someone who once had your full attention. It's in the little things. They notice you're no longer watching their stories. They notice mutual friends stop asking about them. They notice when their name no longer brings a storm to your face, but only a calm breeze, like a chapter already read and closed. And somewhere deep inside them, a voice begins to whisper, "You messed up something real." But here's the part that Stoicism teaches us. Your peace is not a punishment. It's not a weapon. It's a boundary. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." So while they expect noise, you offer quiet. Where they brought chaos, you plant order. And where they abandoned you without a word, you walk forward with dignity. Because healing doesn't always happen with apologies. Sometimes it begins when you stop waiting for them to acknowledge the damage and start building a life where their absence is no longer the headline. There's a beautiful paradox in human behavior. People often realize someone's value not when that person is loud and demanding it, but when that person is gone, quiet, unavailable. You didn't have to scream. You didn't have to block or curse. You just stopped trying. And in that stillness, they began to hear the echo of what they lost. A man I once coached named Dennis put it this way: "She kept waiting for me to beg, but I didn't. I just started hiking again, spending time with my grandson, writing music." 2 months later, she called. Her voice was shaking. She said, "You really moved on, didn't you?" And I said, "I had to." That moment wasn't about pride. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. Letting go is not about teaching them a lesson. It's about freeing yourself from the emotional taxation of being invested in someone who has proven they are no longer invested in you. So if you're in that space right now, holding on to someone who walked away quietly, or waiting for the ghost to knock at your door again, remember this: they might come back, they might not. But your healing does not depend on their return. The moment you let go, not in rage, but in acceptance, is the moment the power begins to return to your life. Let them feel the silence. Let them feel the space where your love used to live. And if they ever come knocking again, you'll answer, not with anger, but with the calm of someone who no longer needs anything from them. That's when you know you've already won, not because they suffer, but because you stopped suffering for them. Part 4. The ego crumbles when you don't react. There's a kind of silence that doesn't scream. It simply exists. But in that stillness, it shakes foundations, especially for the person who expected you to chase, to argue, to bleed emotionally on command. When you don't respond, their carefully curated identity, built on control, validation, or superiority, starts to fracture. Why? Because ego feeds on reaction, and silence, true Stoic silence, is starvation. The stage they never anticipated. In the aftermath of betrayal, most people expect confrontation. That's the script we all know. Yelling, crying, closure-seeking conversations. But when you step out of that drama, when you refuse to play your part in the emotional theater, it stuns them. You might think you're doing nothing by not replying, by not reaching out, by not defending yourself. But that's not nothing. That is power. That is restraint. That is the kind of internal discipline the Stoics spoke of. And to the ego that betrayed you, it's an earthquake. When you don't react, they're left alone with their decision. No resistance. No reassurance that they still have power over you. Just silence. And in that silence, their own conscience becomes loud. The ego's diet: control, justification, superiority. Let's break it down. Control. They expected you to spiral. When you don't, they feel powerless. Justification. They need you to lash out so they can say, "See, this is why I left." When you don't, they can't justify their actions. Superiority. Their ego wants to feel above you. Your silence flattens that hierarchy. It's ironic. You're the one who was abandoned, yet your refusal to react makes them uncomfortable. That's the hidden cost of ego. It can't exist without someone else's reaction. And when you don't give them one, the ego starts to crumble from its own weight. The Stoic choice to hold still, Epictetus said, "If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. When you choose not to engage, you reclaim sovereignty over your mind. You're saying, you no longer have the privilege of disturbing my peace. That's not weakness. That's Stoic power. Your silence isn't passive. It's an active boundary, a signal that says, I will not bleed for you anymore. And the ego that once thrived on your emotional energy, it begins to panic. They might message you after weeks of silence, accidentally, like your old photos. Ask mutual friends how you're doing. Post vague updates meant for you to see. It's not love. It's not guilt. It's the ego realizing it has lost the fuel it fed on, your attention. How the ego reacts to non-reaction. There's a sequence that often plays out. Confusion. Why aren't they saying anything? Are they okay? Annoyance. Why are they acting like nothing happened? Projection. They must not care. They're so cold. Desperation. I need to do something to get a reaction. Reflection. Did I make a mistake? This is where you must stay still. Don't break the silence for revenge, for closure, or to prove something. Those are ego traps on your side. Let them feel what they created, not because you want them to suffer, but because truth only surfaces when the noise dies down. Sometimes people can't face themselves until they lose the audience they used to perform for. The inner work that your silence invites. While their ego crumbles, your own soul gets a rare chance to breathe. In silence, you begin to heal, not to become heartless, but whole. Your energy returns, your self-respect sharpens, your need for validation fades. That's when the real shift happens. You no longer wait for them to realize your worth. You start acting like someone who's already valuable, because you are. And strangely, that's often when they reach out, not because they've changed, but because your silence has made them uncomfortable in their own skin. Here's where the real Stoic challenge begins. Don't confuse their discomfort with your duty. They left. You grieved. You healed. You owe no explanation for your peace. Story: the man who didn't respond. A woman once shared this with me. After a 10-year marriage, her husband walked out without explanation. Just a note on the counter. No fight, no goodbye. For 3 months, she said nothing. No texts, no calls, Her friends thought she was in denial, but she was reading Marcus Aurelius and writing in a journal every morning. She said, "I refuse to make myself smaller just to get closure from a coward." Month 4, he messaged her. Then again. Then he showed up, sobbing. "You didn't even yell at me. You didn't fight. That silence, it broke me." She replied, "That silence was your echo. I just stopped clapping." She didn't take him back, but her peace, untouchable. You don't win by speaking louder. You win by living better. When you don't react, the ego that discarded you realizes something powerful. You were not dependent. You were disciplined. You were not passive. You were principled. You chose to rise rather than chase, to rebuild rather than react, to be silent, not to punish, but to protect. And in that silence, the loudest message was sent. So if you're there now, aching with the urge to respond, to prove you're right, to get even, breathe. Step back. Remember who you are when no one's watching, because sometimes the most stoic thing you can do is nothing at all. Part 5. The power of emotional detachment. There's a moment in life when you stop begging people to understand you, when you stop explaining yourself, stop replaying conversations in your mind, and stop searching for closure that never comes. That moment isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with a grand declaration. It comes in silence, like the breath after heartbreak, like dawn after a sleepless night. That's when you begin to understand the power of emotional detachment. Not coldness, not indifference, but clarity. Not the shutting down of your heart, but the opening of your mind. I remember the exact day it happened for me. I was standing in the kitchen, coffee gone cold, staring at a message I never received. They had left, vanished without a word, not even the decency of a goodbye. I felt the familiar sting rise in my chest, the questions, the ache. But instead of spiraling into another storm of overthinking, I just sat with it. And for the first time, I didn't try to fix anything. I didn't reach out. I didn't cry. I didn't plead for clarity. I simply let the silence be. That's emotional detachment. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care more about your peace than someone else's chaos. Emotional detachment isn't numbness. It's wisdom. In the West, we're often taught to fight for things. Fight to be heard. Fight to be seen. Fight for love. But the Stoics knew that peace doesn't come from controlling external events. It comes from mastering our internal response. Epictetus once said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Emotional detachment is about stepping back from that imagination. It's choosing not to write tragedy into a story that's already over. When someone leaves you abruptly, without honesty, without grace, it reveals more about their fear than your worth. Emotional detachment is the discipline of refusing to make their silence your self-blame. You create space for truth to surface. The moment you detach, you create space for perspective, for clarity, for truth. Think of a stormy sea. When you're drowning in emotional entanglement, everything is murky. You can't see the patterns, the intentions, the signs. But when you rise above, when you become the observer rather than the reactor, you begin to notice what was hidden in the chaos. I looked back on the relationship. Once I detached emotionally, I saw the red flags I ignored, the manipulation hidden in charm, the small cruelties disguised as jokes, the withdrawal of affection when I needed support the most. I had mistaken inconsistency for mystery, silence for depth, emotional games for love. Detachment helped me tell the truth. Not their version, not the one I hoped for, but the one I needed. You regain power over your emotions. When we're emotionally entangled, we're not responding, we're reacting. One message can ruin your day. One silence can wreck your confidence. One look, one word, one action, and your world spins. But detachment gives you back the controls. You stop waiting, you stop checking your phone, you stop wondering how they feel and start asking how you feel. When they finally text you 3 weeks later, "Hey, just been busy," you don't erupt with anger or longing. You don't rush to reply. You read it, nod to yourself, and realize their absence told you everything their words never could. You don't need to punish them. You don't need to prove anything. You've already moved into a different state of being, one where your value isn't tethered to their attention. Detachment allows you to love without losing yourself. This part surprises most people. Emotional detachment isn't about walls or apathy. It's the foundation for real love because it's rooted in wholeness. When you love from a place of detachment, you're not seeking someone to complete you. You're not clinging to their presence for identity. You're not making them the solution to your old wounds. You love clearly, not desperately. You can walk away if needed. You can stay and still be yourself. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." Detachment is bravery. It's freedom. It's the refusal to be imprisoned by emotions that were never yours to carry in the first place. What happens when you finally detach? Something profound. They feel it. They don't say it out loud, but they feel the shift. They sense that their grip on your mind is gone, that the games no longer work, that your silence isn't pain, it's power. People who thrive on emotional chaos often crumble when they lose the reaction they depended on. They may try to come back. They may send subtle feelers, but you won't respond the same. Not because you hate them, but because you've changed. Your peace is no longer negotiable. Your joy is no longer outsourced. You've learned to live in your own soul, not someone else's shadow. That morning in the kitchen, staring at the cold coffee, I made a quiet decision. Not to chase, not to fix, not to explain, just to let go. That was the beginning of my freedom and the most radical act of self-respect I've ever committed. Because detachment, my friend, is not about turning away from love. It's about turning toward yourself. And in that turning, you find what you've been searching for all along, not them, but peace. Real, solid, unshakable peace. And that no one can take from you. The moment they realize you're gone for good, there comes a moment, a still, heavy silence that settles into the hearts of those who once left without a word. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or drama. It arrives quietly, like the moment you realize a train has passed, and it's never coming back. This is not the silence they chose. It's the silence they now fear. At first, they believed you'd wait, that your world revolved around their presence, that they could vanish and you'd orbit like a satellite, always hoping, always watching. But as time wore on, the silence stopped being a weapon and turned into a mirror. One day they reach for their phone and find it empty. No unread messages, no calls, no reaction to their subtle attempts to check in. That's when the first crack appears, because now they realize you've built something without them. They see the quiet strength in your detachment. They feel the weight of their own absence, and worst of all, they start to suspect that maybe, just maybe, they never really mattered the way they thought they did. You've stopped explaining. You've stopped defending. You've stopped reacting. And for people who need attention to survive, your indifference is more painful than rage. They test the waters. A comment on an old post, a funny memory sent your way, maybe even a fake apology wrapped in charm. But your silence, it's no longer bitter, it's peaceful. And that's what unsettles them, because you're not waiting for them to return. You're already gone. In this emotional climax, you are not the one who collapses. They are. Not because you punished them, not because you sought revenge, but because you moved on, and they didn't expect that. They imagined they held power by leaving without closure, but in reality, they gave you something priceless: freedom. Freedom to grow, rebuild, and rediscover your worth without their interference. This moment where they realize the door is no longer cracked open, where your absence is not just physical but emotional, that's when they crumble. And here's the cruel irony. The more you flourish, the more they spiral. Because for the first time, they can no longer hide behind excuses. They are forced to sit in the silence they created, now turned against them. This is the beauty of Stoic detachment. You don't need to announce your healing. You don't need to prove a point. You simply live better, and your peace becomes the loudest thing they never expected. You've been through the hurt. You've cried in silence. You've questioned your worth. But in choosing to disappear, in choosing to stop chasing, you've reclaimed your dignity. Not with rage, not with guilt, not with theatrics, but with stillness, with presence, with power. This is the moment they realize you're not punishing them, you're protecting yourself. And that's what makes the silence so final. Let them sit with it. Let them realize that the door they closed is no longer there to reopen. And if they ever reach out, months, even years later, know this: you don't owe them an entry back into a life you built with blood and silence. This is your power. This is your peace, and it is unshakable. In the quiet that follows the storm, when all the words have been said, or left unsaid, and the distance has settled into permanence, something shifts inside you. There's no more grasping, no more explaining, no more trying to prove your worth to someone who chose silence over honesty. What remains is not bitterness, but clarity. This journey of abandonment, silence, collapse, and quiet dignity was never about revenge. It was about truth. And the deepest truth is this: those who leave without a word tell you everything you need to know. Their silence speaks not of your inadequacy, but of their inability to face themselves. They vanish, hoping you'll chase, but you don't. You sit with the ache, you feel it fully, and you let it burn what no longer belongs. And from that fire you begin again, not hardened, not cold, but reborn. You stop asking why they left. Instead, you ask, what did this pain awaken in me? Because this isn't about them anymore. This is about you, your ability to feel deeply without becoming bitter, to love without losing yourself, to endure heartbreak without letting it define you. You become the kind of person who doesn't need to scream to be heard. You become grounded, rooted in a calm that no one can shake. You stop reacting and start observing. You stop clinging and start living. This is where philosophy becomes more than words. It becomes your spine. This is where Stoicism is not a cold rejection of feeling, but a warm, unshakable presence in your own life. And in the end, they may collapse under the weight of their choices. But you rise not out of vengeance, but out of wisdom. You walk forward, not to prove them wrong, but because you finally understood your own worth. This is the quiet power they never saw coming, a Stoic truth to carry with you. In the end, people will come and go. Some will leave without a goodbye. Others will stay just long enough to make their absence hurt. But through it all, one truth remains. Your peace is your responsibility. You can't control the silence. You can't rewrite their exit. But you can choose what happens next. You can choose stillness over chaos, strength over reaction, wisdom over resentment. Seneca once wrote, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage." And perhaps, in these moments of abandonment, when the ones you trusted vanish without a word, the most courageous thing you can do is to live fully anyway, to rebuild, to breathe, to walk away, not in anger, not in revenge, but in calm defiance of their expectations. Because when you stop chasing closure, you give yourself clarity. When you stop seeking revenge, you begin to heal. And when you stop explaining your worth, the right people will see it. Let them wonder where your pain went. Let them feel the weight of your absence, and let their collapse be a quiet echo behind your rising strength. If this message stirred something in you, if you felt seen, heard, or empowered, consider joining us here at Stoic Philosophy. This channel is a place where reflection meets resilience, where ancient wisdom lights the path of modern healing. Subscribe now to Stoic Philosophy, and let the silence teach you strength.
Thank you for watching this video here on the Stoic Philosophy. If you found value in this, I invite you to explore more videos on the channel. There's so much more wisdom to uncover. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next one. Thanks again for being here, and I'll see you in the next video.